Good evening. This is the Labor Exchange, and I'm Dennis Creese, a member of the Boulder Area Labor Council, AFL-CIO. The subject of tonight's program will be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., martyr for the labor movement, the civil rights movement, and many other causes. With us is Kenneth Rigmaiden, Executive Vice President for International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and also Glenda Robinson, President, the Finish and Touch Janitorial Service, and also a civil rights activist at Memphis State University, Memphis, Tennessee, 1966 through 1970 and beyond. So with that, Ken and Glenda, thank you for being on Labor Exchange.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Glenda, let's start with you. At the time of his death, April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was in Memphis, Tennessee, giving support to striking sanitation workers, the vast majority who were African Americans. Where were you at this time? What were you doing? And what was your reaction to this tragic event?
I was, Dennis, a 19-year-old junior at Memphis State University, and I was preparing, actually, for future Black Student Association meetings or BSA meetings with Dr. King and others who were planning for the March 28th march. Or actually, they were planning future marches. I was coming in from the meeting. My reaction to the tragic event was sadness, hurt, anger, and then hopelessness.
All right, then I can imagine that. And Ken, I just wanted to share with you, and Glenda, just before we started this interview, showed me a poster that was from, she was with a march with Dr. King on March 28th in Memphis, but on April 8th, in terms of stepping back forward to, support these sanitation workers, she shows me a picture of her and many people marching in Memphis, and it's very impressive. So with that, Ken, these 1,300 striking sanitation workers eventually won recognition as American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employee Members, AFSCME members. Do you believe this strike helped change the direction or the paradigm for all African American workers and subsequently all public sector workers?
Dennis, I think, if I work backwards from your question, it really did change the paradigm for all workers, specifically those who worked in the public sector. I can only imagine in 1968 that AFSCME as an entity was a relatively new organization. To be able to strike for 65 days, where the first instance of not only union, but religious community and community in general came together to support the efforts of those 1,300 striking sanitation workers. It really did show the power of community working together and supporting each other. I think it's an outstanding demonstration of that. And then if you look at the African American unit there, certainly as an African American and also a union member, I think the reason that it was so powerful for African Americans to join a union and to be organized is that was where they got their voice. While unions are certainly social organizations that suffer from the same ills of society in general, there your vote counts. You were never denied your vote, and you were able to have a real say in your organization's affairs. So I think from that perspective, giving or having the African American worker particularly in Memphis and beyond, it did change the paradigm.
All right, then. Glenda, on Sunday, February 20th, 2011, we were both in attendance at the Boulder International Film Festival showing the new documentary, Freedom Riders. An African-American woman, Diane Lane, Fisk University, Nashville, Tennessee, was featured in this film. How key, instrumental, was the support of African women like her and like yourself in the civil rights movement?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you to Diane Lane Nash for her service to the movement. And then I want to highlight just a few unsung, what I call sheroes of the movement, beginning with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother. But I want to mention the name of Ella Baker, a person that very few people know a lot about, but really was a mentor to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as well as a very active member for 40 to 50 years of the NAACP. Black women, I call them women of courage, vision, and purpose, are certainly the glues that hold the family, the home, the church, and community together. Especially in today's age when I think I read somewhere a statistic of about 65% of African American households are run by black women, as the single parent. So my hats are off to the African American women, and particularly the women of the movement.
All right, then. Ken, today, Monday, April 4th, 2011, is Solidarity Day. The theme here is, we are one, respect our rights. How important is this effort for all workers throughout the United States?
Well, Dennis, I think the events that really started earlier this year in Wisconsin serve to really present an opportunity to those of us who work for a living, those of us in organized labor, and those who aren't represented by a contract, to turn a moment into a movement. It is so vitally important for us to understand that the forces that have kind of gathered to destroy our way of life and our way of working really require a unified effort to fight back on it. Respecting our rights is key. Being able to fight off the Governor Walker attacks, the attacks going on in Indiana, the attacks in Ohio, the attacks in 20 other states, on various aspects of collective bargaining, contracting out work, anything that has an impact on us as workers has to serve notice upon those of us who work for a living that we have to stand together, or we will just be steamrolled by those who wouldn't want us to have a middle-class way of life.
All right, then. Glenda, let's go back to you now. Let's revisit Memphis, Tennessee, March, April 1968. Beside the ultimate sacrifice given by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., there were two sanitation workers who lost their lives in a horrific workplace accident. For the KGNU listening audience, could you please tell the story?
Yes, I see that you refer to freedom as sometimes meaning the cost of human life. I always say freedom is not really free. It has been and continues to be generally paid for by the cost of a human life. This was no different with the lives of those two sanitation workers who were taking a break They didn't get regular breaks. So they climbed in the back of the sanitation truck, and it said that somehow the switch was accidentally tripped and they were crushed to death in the back of those trucks, in the back of that truck. But what I also want to do, Dennis, is I want to go back just a little bit and talk about Dr. King always insisted on having a nonviolent march. His strategy of nonviolent passive resistance, coupled with the economic boycott in Montgomery, resulted in the most effective, successful advancement for people of color in the 20th century. And so, just to reflect, in 1963, we all remember the infamous I Have a Dream speech march on Washington. Later that, in September of 1963, 4 little black girls were murdered in Birmingham, Alabama, bombed by the KKK at the 16th Street Baptist Church. Also in 1963, JFK was assassinated. In 1964, we had civil rights workers who were murdered. The 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi were killed. Viola Liuzzo was killed. She was the first white woman killed registering people to vote. Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered in Alabama. This is all for basic human civil rights and voting rights. So freedom is not free.
All right, then. Very well put. Ken, I'm coming back to you now. Is it your article called, quote-unquote, Solidarity in Wisconsin and Beyond, which was recently published in the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades Quarterly Journal, January through March 2011. Could you share some of your thoughts expressed in this article, and, again, how widespread are the attacks on all workers throughout the United States?
The attacks, Dennis, are on every worker in the United States. I talked about after the elections in November of 2010, where there was a significant change in the makeup of Congress, and those folks who came into majority status in Congress took that as a charge for them to vilify organized labor is a single cause of the economic doldrums and why the reason that state, federal, and local budgets couldn't be balanced. But those attacks, in where I look at it, is attacks on, number one, as it relates to Wisconsin, public sector collective bargaining that could severely limit or eliminate altogether the right to bargain over wages, hours, and working conditions. Attacks on education, our teachers, which include expanding voucher programs, charter schools, and even a parent trigger program that would allow parents in a community to petition to shut down a public school and replace it with a charter school or a voucher program. All serve to limit the rights of teachers and school employees. Some of the other items were legislation to privatize or contract out government services, the consideration on the federal level to allow states to declare bankruptcy, for goodness sakes, and therefore nullify any collective bargaining agreement with the state. Things that impact workers outside the public sector as well as inside the public sector, paycheck deception laws that would limit or prohibit the use of union dues for political action, Save Our Secret ballot initiatives that would hamper or make it almost impossible to pass a card check bill. And as it relates to my trade, attacks on project labor agreements as well as prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon, which impact us directly. So the impact is on every worker, on every class of work, whether you're a public employee, a private sector employee, a building trades person, any person that works for a living. These laws and legislation that are being proposed in over 20 states have a direct impact on our way of life.
All right, then. For those of you who've joined us late, this is Labor Exchange, and I'm Dennis Creese, a member of the Boulder Area Labor Council, AFL-CIO. The subject of tonight's program has been Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., martyr for the labor movement, the civil rights movement, and many other causes. With us is Kenneth Rigmaiden, Executive Vice President, International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and Glenda Robinson, President, Finish and Touch Janitorial Service, and a former civil rights activist at Memphis State University, Memphis, Tennessee, 1966 to 1970. Glenda, today you are very active in giving presentations to classes of high school students based on your civil rights activism, and you've received awards for this as well. What are some of the important lessons or objectives that you deliver to these students about that activity and also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, I'm very honored and very privileged to go into the community colleges as well as to the universities and the high schools and share with the students that prices have really been paid for the prices of the freedoms that we enjoy today. And I think sometimes we have that, what appears to be that disconnect between the generation that is now benefiting from the dues that have been paid and the generation that paid the dues. We certainly must not, we cannot fail to tell the story, and that's what I'm about the business of doing. I'm trying to tell the story. I tell the young women and the young men that greatness lies within each of them, and they have to rise up and answer the call to greatness. I tell them that we've passed the torch on to them, and it's up to them to take the torch and keep Dr. King's dreams alive. Also, I encourage them to be greater than their parents and their grandparents because they have the opportunity to do so. No limits, no excuses, because for them, the sky is the limit. Freedom is fleeting, as you alluded to, and it cannot be taken for granted. We must never forget there is a saying that goes, if we neglect the history of our past, we're bound to repeat it. We don't want to repeat where we've been.
Very good, Glenda, very good. Ken, in a previous interview, I think it was on Martin Luther King, the celebration of January of 2010, I asked you this question, and you did very well with this, because we need to be contemporary, as is Glenda is right now. For those African American, Latino, Asian, Caucasian, and ones with whatever other ethnic persuasions, these workers that are of a younger generation, do you think they sometimes forget the sacrifice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and are you proactive in refreshing their memories?
Dennis, first I want to say, Glenda, kudos to you and all the work that you're doing, and not only keeping the memory alive, but really stressing what it means to be a person that tries to do the best for their community. And all those terms that you talk about, not feeling entitled or privileged, not to be so spoiled, that freedom is fleeting and it can't be taken for granted. Yeah. You're absolutely right and on point. I can speak, Dennis, to what happens within my internal organization. We certainly feel, I certainly feel that many times we do kind of forget or take for granted the sacrifice that those who've made before us. Myself, I've been very fortunate in that I've came from a family of workers, union members who stressed upon me that the freedom that you get in the collective bargaining agreement is something that you have to be diligent about maintaining. That's what we try to pass along to our young members. We call them these days young lions, Dennis. And certainly through our training programs, try to ensure that those folks understand the connection between human dignity, being able to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, being able to have health and welfare coverage, to be able to retire with dignity, that those aren't a given, that people like Martin Luther King, who made the connection between community, religion, and union, is really the way you have to be in order to be successful and in order to maintain the lifestyle that you so much deserve. We talk about it through our community organizing for real economics and talk about that very connection. We're not about thinking that we as organized labor or as building trades people can handle our own business ourselves. We have to be completely integrated with the communities where we live and work and make sure that the opportunity for one is an opportunity for all, regardless of your ethnicity, culture, or gender. So that's kind of the way we do it within the IUPAT, and I'm proud to be a part of the IUPAT and how we start to transition into recognizing that very fact.
All right, then, Ken, I have this question. I'm going to read a passage. Glenda thinks that you would be best to respond to it. And it's from American Labor, M.B. Schaffner. He was the author. And it's from, and this is how it goes. An effective Negro labor coalition was in the making at the time of the tragic death of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Negroes are almost entirely a working people, he declared shortly before his assassination. Our needs are identical with labor's needs: decent wages, fair working conditions, livable housing, old age security, health and welfare measures, conditions in which families can grow, have education for their children, and respect in the community. That is why Negroes support labor's demands and fight laws which curb labor. That is why the labor hater and the labor baiter is virtually always a twin-headed creature spewing anti-Negro epithets from one mouth and anti-labor propaganda from the other mouth. The two most dynamic and cohesive liberal forces in the country are the labor movement and the Negro freedom movement. I look forward confidently to the day when all who work for a living will be one, with no thought to their separateness as Negroes, Jews, Italians, or any other distinctions. This will be the day when we shall bring into full realization the American dream, a dream yet unfulfilled, a dream of equality, of opportunity, of privilege and property widely distributed, a dream of a land where men will not take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. Your remarks, Ken.
Boy, Dennis, that is powerful. And I must say that as a labor leader, as a union member, as a person who entered an apprenticeship program, completed that apprenticeship program, and worked with the tools of my particular craft, that does say it all. Really, it's about equal, consistent opportunity where, to take a phrase from Dr. King, where we become judged on
the content of our character. Yes.
And not the color of our skin. Right. Or to even phrase it differently, of our gender. If you're able to do the work, you should be entitled to do the work. You should be entitled to enter into any training program, and the only thing that should impede you is whether you have or have not the ability to do the work at hand. Going to the needs and wants of African American workers and organized labor, I do think that was a point. I said earlier in the conversation here that one of the best places to be in the 40s and 50s, and I can use my father as an example, is to be in organized labor. As an African American, at least you had that sense of being entitled and that your vote counted, where you didn't have to fight or you weren't excluded from the ballot box as was in the 20th century. Now we have that right, but as Glenda said, we can't take it for granted. It's not free. We can't be comfortable with it, at least not yet. We still have to stay diligent. We still have to work hard at making sure that we're fair and equal, and that we have the doors and ladders of opportunity available to anyone who wants to work at whatever we do. And let's face it, as organized labor, we can't be strong unless we have the broad spectrum of society believing in us. African American workers, Latino American workers, Asian American workers, Caucasian American workers. It's across the board. If we don't have the sense to know that in order for us to advance, we all have to be working together as a community, within the communities where we live and work, then we won't be successful. But I think that the opportunity that we've had coming out of 1968, transitioning to now, and what's going on, which seems to be almost a duplication of what went on when the sanitation workers were striking for their rights and for their dignity, that we'd be doomed to repeat it, as Glenda said.
All right.
And I hope we're not going down there. I mean, it's interesting to note that these last couple of weeks I've been studying or reading and learning a little bit about the sanitation strike in 1968 and those 65 days. And there was an interview of a couple of the union members who were involved in that strike, where Herbert Parson said, well, it's really sad to see what's going on in Wisconsin. It's almost like a flashback. Or Joe Warren saying, those folks need a union. And then Alvin Turner, who really tied it up, which cites how I feel about it, if you don't stand strong, church, union, and community, you won't stand.
All right, then. Ken, I got 1 minute left, and I want to give it to Glenda, all right now. Is it, Glenda, on this tragic 43rd anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination, what final thoughts or comments do you have for the KGNU listening audience?
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Ken, for those powerful comments. I love this Solidarity Day. In unity, there is strength. I always say you can keep the dream alive by treating people the way you want to be treated. Our national motto is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Always put your best foot forward. Get involved in your community, your local churches, and other organizations that are making a difference. Above all, when the opportunity presents itself for you to vote, let your voice be heard and realize that people died for you to exercise that right, and pledge to use your differences to make a difference.
All right, then. Ken Rigmaiden, Glenda Jackson, thank you for being on Labor Exchange at KGNU. And for those of you who have any comments about this show or any other show on KGNU, please call 303-447-9911. And next week, Monday, April 11, 2011, please listen to Le Lucha Sigue at 6 p.m. This has been the Labor Exchange, and I'm Dennis Creese for KGNU Boulder, KGNU Denver, and KGNU.org.